Good morning. My name is Kurt Bush. I'm the campus pastor here at Trinity Hospers. Welcome again to everybody joining us live in person and everybody joining us online as well. I have one more really quick announcement for all of you. We talked about this a little bit last week, but we are wondering here at Trinity Church if maybe now is the right time to launch what we call life groups. Maybe you've heard of this before. Life groups are small intentional groups of people that focus on 3 B's. Being, becoming, and blessing. Being who we're called to be together, the way that God has created us to be together. Becoming more and more like Jesus together in small community. And then blessing as a small community outward as an outflow of what God is doing in us. We've never done this in Hospers before, but we are just humbly wondering if maybe God is leading us to starting those now. But we would love to hear from you. Before we launch that, we'd love to hear from you and know what your interest is. If you have an interest in learning more about life groups or participating in one or even leading one or knowing more about what that means, we would love to know that. There was a link that went out in an email last week from Michelle Christie that you could click a link and take a survey to tell us what you're thinking. Or there are some paper surveys in the lobby on the coffee bar with a basket that you can fold them up and leave them in there. So we would love to know what you're feeling there from the Lord too. Now, with that, I want to transition a little bit. You may know that our faith tradition, our faith history, is built on things that we call creeds and confessions. These creeds and confessions are doctrinal statements that we rely on to know what we believe, to fall back on what we believe about Jesus, about the church, and what our call is. And we as a denomination have 3 of these creeds that we fall back on for our doctrinal beliefs. One of them is called the Nicene Creed. Have you heard of that? Anybody? Yeah, if you haven't, it's totally okay. You know why? Because it's been around since like 325, like literally the year 325. It was written in all places, Nicaea, the Nicene Creed, right? See what they did there? This is a creed written to establish a doctrine of who Jesus is. There was some voices that said Jesus is not fully divine or Jesus is not fully human. This creed was written for the church to use to combat some of those voices. So we think it's incredibly valuable that we hang on to these, that we go to these, that we seek these, that the church has gone before us to answer really tough questions in these creeds. So I want to invite you to stand this morning as we confess our faith together by saying the words of the Nicene Creed. The words are going to be on the screen behind me. Again, let's say them together. There's no response here. Let's just say them together. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, begotten from the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of the same essence as the Father. Through him all things were made. For us and for our salvation, he came down from heaven. He became incarnate by the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and was made human. He was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate. He suffered and was buried. The 3rd day he rose again according to the Scriptures. He ascended to heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead. His kingdom will never end. And we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life. He proceeds from the Father and the Son, and with the Father and the Son is worshiped and glorified. He spoke through the prophets. We believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church. We affirm one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. We look forward to the resurrection of the dead and to the life in the world to come. Amen. You may be seated.
Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the light that shines in the darkness, that the darkness cannot overcome. As followers of Jesus, do we shine with the same radiance as our Master, or have our lights been dimmed? In recent times, have we lost our credibility? Is it time for the church, the bride of Christ, to recover her luster and brilliance? Can we once again live as a people committed to Jesus, not only as the way to the Father, but as the way of the Father? Can we shine the light of Christ in such a way that it illuminates a dark and weary world? It is time for us to be radiant.
I'm so bummed that video was dark. Andy Keller made that video, and it was like the coolest video ever. It like pans over the corn. It's like all that we love about Iowa in the morning, right? There's this like fog is great. So we'll work on that for next week because that's a pretty dope video. That said, let's pray together before we go to the Word. Gracious God, you gather us here into this space as your people, as your church, as the bride of Christ. Not in vain, but to speak to us. You gather us so that we might raise our voices, and that by your Holy Spirit our words reach you, God. God, now as we shift to your word, would you open our ears and our hearts to allow us to hear what you have for us? And would the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts together be pleasing and acceptable to you? Amen. I want to tell you a story. It was 2019. I was in a church basement. My family and I were in a church basement. You all know the church basement. The fellowship hall was in the basement. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? You can put yourself there. We're in this basement on a Saturday for an anniversary party for someone that we love deeply. And we're there with lots of other people that we love deeply. 2019, I'm an associate pastor of a church at this time in the Quad Cities. And someone else that I love dearly, who would not call themselves a Christian, might call themselves the opposite, who is deeply engaged in working in the political sphere. And if you remember what 2019 was, if you remember the fall of 2019, this was like the ramp of all the political season, and we were all like, oh man, another year of this, right? You remember this? This person that I love deeply actually worked on a campaign, on a presidential campaign, and this person was here celebrating this anniversary with me, and this is a young person, and she came up to me, and she said to me, I'll never forget it, she said to me, almost in a sad tone, almost in a lament, she said, "What is wrong with the church?" And she, again, almost sad. Now, this is not a political statement, but in 2019, no matter which political side you were on, I think the church acted and behaved in ways that could make us all kind of sad. And I have to be honest, when she asked that, I didn't know how to answer. Because I think I felt some of the same things, but it was striking to me that this was her question to me, a pastor in a church. See, something wasn't right. Something isn't right. This is a phrase that you hear me say from time to time, and typically when you hear me say it, that something isn't right, usually I mean it in a way that the life that we know today isn't how life is meant to be, that this isn't the life that we'll live when Jesus comes back to set all things right. Amen? And that's certainly true, but I want to say something isn't right in a slightly different way today. See, something has been shifting, something's been happening for decades, and I think if you remember 2020, I think 2020 either rapidly sped up this shift or maybe just finally exposed some pretty hard truths for us about the church. Let me share some of these hard truths. A Gallup poll shows that only 37% of all Americans have trust or confidence in a local church. The same poll shows that 63% of Americans identify as Christians. That feels like such a high number to have the kingdom feel so far away sometimes, doesn't it? Here's another poll. Another Gallup poll shows that only 21% of non-Christians have a positive view of the church. See, the church is simply not attractive the way it is today, or the way the church is reflecting the gospel or the kingdom of God is simply not attractive today. A Lifeway poll done recently shows that, by and large, young people believe that the church and local churches are both disconnected and detached, which means intentionally detached from the issues that they face every single day. It seems like every month there's another story of a moral failure in a church or by a Christian leader that's been covered up for decades, right? Christian leaders and Christian voices continue to encourage and persist in this almost radical political affiliation for what? For the sake of control and influence. This same Lifeway poll says that 49% of pastors in America regularly hear their churches and their church people perpetuate and spread conspiracy theories as truth. Now listen to what Paul says about the church. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 15, Paul calls the church to be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish, in the midst of, that in the midst of is important, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which, again, that in which is important, in which we, the church, shine like stars in the world. Something is not right. The bride of Christ, it's the church, the bride of Christ seems to be sick. Or maybe our shine is quite dim. Let me say again, I don't think this happens overnight. I really do think this has been a decades-long shift, and maybe so slowly that it's been imperceptible until 2020. But the reality is that we know. We know it now. Maybe you've heard me say we can't unknow what we know. Right? We can't unknow what we know, and we must address it. I think the time is now. I think the time is now for the church, for the body of Christ, to do a little self-examination. And I think now is the time for the church to look at itself, ourselves, because frankly, everyone outside the church is looking at us too. Either looking for hope or looking cynically, trying to poke holes in the church. And either way, I wonder if either of those ever really see Jesus. Now, let me say this. This is not an invitation to make people happy. This is not an invitation to compromise our core convictions or our doctrinal theology of this creed and these other creeds and confessions that we hold dear. It's not a call to compromise those to look attractive, but I want to say this. Maybe you've heard this before. I've heard this so many times that we think that, of course, the church is going to look unattractive to people outside the church. Of course the church is going to look unattractive. Why? Because Jesus calls to repentance, and people don't like to be called to repentance, so they choose out of it. I just don't. I reject that. Here's why. Jesus in the Gospels, do you remember who Jesus was most attractive to? Do you remember who Jesus' message was most attractive to? It was the people on the margins. It was the people that didn't know him. It was not the religious folks. In fact, the religious folks, it was so unattractive, Jesus himself was so unattractive that they killed him. So I reject this notion that the church is unattractive or should be unattractive to people outside the church. I wonder if Jesus himself was so attractive to those folks because he showed this new way of being. this third way, if you will. I wonder if Jesus was so attractive because he called the people to a different way. He lived a different way. And I'm wondering if God is inviting us now to follow Jesus in this new way. Let me explain this new way. There's this phrase that we're going to use in this coming series called the third way of living. Now, sometimes this language makes us a little squishy. It makes us a little nervous, doesn't it? It feels like we're going to find this compromise and we're going to have to be like a squishy jellyfish in our convictions. That's not true. This third way language goes all the way back, are you ready for this? To the 2nd century. To the 2nd century when a Roman official named Dionysius, anybody heard that name? This guy named Dionysius, he's a Roman official. He's not a Christian. He got a letter sent to him by someone, we don't know who, but the author of the letter wrote in the 2nd century to this Roman official about the Christians at the time, and wrote to Dionysius about this weird way that these Christians are living, right? This third way. This is why it's called a third way, because the first way is the way of the Romans, right? This sort of civil religion, allegiance to Rome first. That's one way. The second way is this Jewish way, where the Jewish people would isolate from the Romans, right? Would isolate and live according to the Mosaic law, would celebrate rituals and be completely separate. Those were the two ways. The author writes that the Christians are living in this weird third way in the middle that's a little bit of both. Let me read for you. I can't say it as well as a theologian can. This is a book called Resilient Faith by Jerry Sitzer. He's a Christian author. He writes about this letter from this random author to Dionysius. Let me read this. This is Jerry Sitzer's words first. He says, Christians appeared to be like everyone else. They spoke the local language, lived in local neighborhoods, wore local styles of clothing, ate local food, shopped in local markets, and followed local customs. Now this is from the letter. This is a quote from the letter that went to Dionysius. For Christians cannot be distinguished from the rest of the human race by country or language or custom. They do not live in cities of their own. They do not use a peculiar language or form of speech. They do not follow an eccentric manner of life. End quote. Now I'm going back to Jerry Sitzer. At a surface level, Christians appeared to blend into Roman society quite seamlessly, yet they were also quite different, embodying not simply a different religion, but a different and new way of life. What was this third way? The third way was like a resistance movement, both subversive and peaceful, bearing witness to God's coming kingdom. But rather, this is important, rather than following a strategy of violent revolution as the Zealots would, Christians immersed themselves in the culture as agents of the kingdom. Christians aspired to follow another way, Jesus' way. They prayed for the emperor but refused to worship him. Third way. We're going to use this a lot over the next 6 weeks. But the question is, are we, the church, shining brightly? Are we radiant? Are we a sign and a foretaste of the beautiful upside-down kingdom that's like no other kingdom that we know? Or have we allowed ourselves to settle? We allowed ourselves to settle with simply being a better, more polished, more put together, or at least we like to think more put together, version of everything else. The truth is, God didn't take on flesh in the person of Jesus for the church to be dim. Jesus didn't die, rise, ascend, and commission the church to be just a better version of ourselves, just a better version of all the other kingdoms, right? Rather, he did those things so that we, the bride of Christ, might be radiant, shining like the stars in the world, so that we might live this third way, not assimilated to culture but not isolated, a part of hard conversations but not polarized, that we might exhibit the fruits of the Spirit when every other kingdom says you don't have to exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. Actually, it's better if you don't. Friends, hear this. I've given some bad news and some bad stats, but I don't think all hope is lost. We serve a God that calls us to be radiant and promises to be with us even until the end of the age, and never leaves us even in the seasons where we might in fact be dimly lit. Now, I've used this word radiant a couple times, right? You saw it on the screen. This is our sermon series. Here's what radiant means. Radiant is defined like this: vividly bright and shining or glowing. Something that's emitted or transmitted. This, radiant, feels like the church that Jesus commissioned when he said, go and make disciples. So we're going to look at ourselves over the next 6 weeks, and we're going to wonder together if we are, in fact, radiant. We're going to take a look at ourselves and explore how we might partner with the Holy Spirit to be radiant disciples and a radiant church. Now, a little bit of a plug here. Some of you have signed up. We're doing a class on Sunday morning right after worship in the front room on this book called Radiant Church. This is by Tara Beth Leach. This is a way that we're creating space that we might wander together and in community together explore how we are or are not being radiant. If you signed up, awesome. If you didn't sign up, you can still come today. I've got a couple extra books. Or you can get a book next week and catch up next week. It's not too late. Just show up. But even if you're not going to do that, or if you're teaching, you're unable to do that, I still want to encourage you to read this book with us. This is not the basis of this sermon series, but it is a tool that we're using to supplement, and it's a tool that all of staff and leadership and consistory are using together to wonder if Trinity Church might have areas in ourselves that are dimly lit. That said, let's launch into this series together. Let's go to God's Word. Let's go to the book of Hebrews. If you have a Bible, you can open it up to the book of Hebrews, chapter 1. I'm going to read together verses 1 through 4. So hear now the word of the Lord. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the worlds. He's the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. And he sustains all things by his powerful word. And when he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is a prologue. If you've ever read a book with a prologue, you know the prologue kind of sets up the rest of the book. The author of Hebrews is writing this section in chapter 1 as a prologue. And I don't know if you caught it, but it is immensely dense theologically. He's doing a lot here in 4 verses, so let me just unpack a little bit of what the author is doing. He's establishing who Jesus is. I mentioned earlier we have these creeds that help us understand doctrinally who Jesus is. This is the author of Hebrews doing that same sort of thing for his audience. He reminds the reader that Jesus is now the prophetic voice of God. He reminds this reader that Jesus is God's Son, therefore heir of all things. Jesus is the creative agent, the sustaining agent of all that's ever been created. The author says that Jesus is the personified glory of God, which in the Old Testament, the glory of God couldn't even be seen, right? Without dying, without being too brilliant that it would kill the person that would see the glory of God. Now Jesus is able to be seen by the whole world, the glory of God in flesh. This is pretty rich doctrinal language. We could create a pretty robust doctrine of Jesus and Jesus' divinity with just these 4 verses, and that's super important. But I think there's more to it. Right, hear me. Doctrine is incredibly important. Without a core of doctrine of faith, we just kind of flow around in the wind. But doctrine alone simply does not lead the church to radiance. Understanding alone simply doesn't lead to radiance. Rather, I think there's something important here. The context of Hebrew and what the author is doing and why, I think, is super relevant. So let me share that. This book is written to a group of first century Christians who are about to give up. Okay? They're about to give up. These are Jewish Christians, which means they were Jewish. Jesus came and died, and then they converted to following Jesus, and they're on the verge of saying, enough's enough. Because they have all these voices around them that are saying, Jesus really isn't divine, right? Jesus really isn't who he says he is. Jesus is kind of part of the story, but you still have to be circumcised. You still have to follow the Mosaic law. Jesus alone is not enough. So these Jewish Christians are like, you know what, we're out. So the author is writing this as an encouragement. To say what? To say, keep your eyes on Jesus. Remember who Jesus is. Build your life around Jesus, not around your troubles, not around how you're combating those voices. Build your life around Jesus. Remember Jesus. Allow yourselves to be caught up, swept up, drawn in to the same living Jesus that is in fact pursuing them. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Seems like pretty good advice, doesn't it? It seems like pretty good advice for us today in a time where something clearly just isn't right. A couple of years ago, a prominent Christian political activist named Tony Perkins. How many of you have heard of Tony Perkins? Tony Perkins was interviewed by a reporter and asked some questions, and one of the questions that he was asked was around during the political election season. One of the questions was around this idea that the church seemed to be willing to either compromise the fruits of the Spirit or excuse a lack of fruits of the Spirit in order to gain political influence. That was the question. He responded by saying this. This is a quote. He said, he's glad that evangelicals are tired of being kicked around. He's happy that evangelicals now have politicians and representatives that are willing to punch the bully in the sandbox. The reporter was obviously taken aback, and the reporter said, well, what about Jesus' words about turning the other cheek? Without missing a beat, Perkins responded by saying, we only have two cheeks. Look, Christianity is not all about being a welcome mat which people can just stomp on. End quote. I think we get it. I think we can feel Tony Perkins' emotions. I think we can feel his desire to not be stepped on as a welcome mat. I think we can feel his desire to want to fight back, right? But can we just name for a second that this is not the Jesus way? These are not words that Tony Perkins brought from Jesus. These are not gospel words. This doesn't reflect this new way of being, and frankly, I can't help but wonder what Jesus, who allowed himself to be stomped on and literally crucified in the most excruciating way possible without lifting a finger, I wonder what Jesus would say to that. This isn't the third way. This isn't the third way. This isn't the Jesus way, and friends, it's far too common. This isn't radiant. It's not attractive. Do you know why it's not attractive? I have a theory. It's not attractive because it's no different. It's not distinctive. This is how the rest of the world behaves. If the church is going to be radiant, it has to be distinctive. And quotes like that simply are not. Here's the point. The point is not to beat up on Tony Perkins, because I think we all sometimes fall into this, don't we? The point is this: that if we truly desire to be a radiant church, we must allow ourselves to be caught up, swept up, dare I say ravished, undone by Jesus. The very foundation of radiance, the very foundation of our distinctiveness as the church is Jesus. Our radiance, our distinctiveness doesn't come from how well we know Scripture. It doesn't come from how well we attend classes or service projects. It doesn't come from how long our family has attended one church. None of that stuff matters. What matters first and foremost is a living relationship with Jesus, the living King as shown in the Gospels. I'm going to be honest with you. This is my heart for you in this place. This is why I'm in vocational ministry. I'm going to be really honest with you. My primary care is that you fall more in love with Jesus every day, that you get drawn closer and closer to Jesus every day. I'll be honest, my primary care is not that this sanctuary is full on Sundays. My primary care is not that our budget is met. My primary care is not that our classes have 1,000 people in them. My primary care for you, that you get caught up and ravished by Jesus. There's a poet named John Donne. Has anybody heard of John Donne? John Donne, he wrote a poem in the 1600s called Batter My Heart. And he ends the poem with asking Jesus to ravish him. Now, there is this model in the early church that this sort of intimacy language would be used pretty frequently. This isn't abnormal, but I love this language of being ravished, of being undone. It's the idea that we're so lost in the love of Jesus that everything else fades. That the desire to have power fades, the desire to have control fades, the desire to not be kicked or punched by the bully in the sandbox, that fades. All of it fades in comparison to the immensity of the grace of Jesus. This is why I say I don't primarily care about those things. Do I care about those things? Yes. They're not my primary concern. And this is why. Because I think when we allow Jesus to ravish us, I think all those other things fall into place. I think when we allow Jesus to ravish us, the grace and immensity of Jesus to ravish us, our thoughts, our words, our actions, our ways of being all get molded and shaped by the Holy Spirit. But I don't think it's the other way around. I don't know about you, but I've never heard of anybody say, man, I behaved myself into a relationship with Jesus. Man, I behaved myself into deep love with Jesus. No. That always leads to guilt and shame. Always. I want to share a little bit of what this was like for me, if I may. On Easter Sunday of 2007, I was 23. I grew up in a church. I grew up in a Christian home. But I don't know until that day that I'd ever really had a true encounter with Jesus. I don't know that I'd ever really experienced Jesus until that day. Amber and I came home from an Easter service, and there was this unexplainable, deep feeling of invitation of what I know now is Jesus saying, be with me. Be with me. This was the first time that I can honestly tell you that I felt Jesus and felt no guilt and shame. Felt no guilt of failure, felt no guilt of not measuring up. Simply the invitation, be with me. I said yes. I didn't have it all put together. That's not how this works, right? There's not an instant light switch, but that led to the most formative and transformative season of my life. That's why I'm here. That story is why I'm here. But that's not all. This past winter, Jesus kind of ravished me again. I don't know if you know, there were a couple things going on in the church this past winter and spring that was really hard. I'll be transparent and tell you that there were days that I didn't want to pastor and lead through the hard. It was such a hard season, I didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to kind of run away a little bit and get away from the hard for a little bit. Frankly, I asked God, why is this so hard? Honestly, the prayer that I prayed was, God, I left my family, and all the things that I love, to follow you. Why is this so hard? And I wanted an answer. I wanted an answer. And God did, as God does. God did a thing that drew me into God's story. See, this is our story. We're a part of this story. The Old Testament, this is our story. God drew me into the story of the Old Testament. What's the story of the Old Testament? Following, failing, exiling, hardship. It's hard. The Old Testament is full of hardship, and yet God was steadfast and present all along. It's the story of Jesus. Jesus followed God's will all the way to the cross. God showed me that I'm not the first one to follow God and have it be hard. Imagine that. This is the story of Jesus. Jesus, the radiant King Jesus, didn't exclude himself from pain or suffering when it meant following God's will and trusting that this place in God's will, following God's will, is actually the place of wholeness, actually the place of fullness, actually the place of life. When all other measures of what's full life says no, this is the way to the cross. This is the third way. And I just wonder if just maybe this is what makes Jesus so radiant. I wonder if this is what makes Jesus so attractive, so radiant. I can't tell you enough how badly I want us to be a radiant church, and you to be radiant disciples, and me to be a radiant disciple. But it has to start with Jesus. It has to start with Jesus as revealed in the Bible. We are Reformed folks. You know what that means? One thing that means is that we believe that Jesus in the Gospels is the most clear picture we have of God's heart and of God's nature. That if we really want to know what God's will for his people is, and what God's heart for his people and his creation are, we see it in Jesus as revealed in the Gospels. That's the clearest picture we have. Our radiance has to start there. Not the Jesus we make, not the Jesus we tack onto what we want to do, but the real, living King Jesus. Friends, here's the invitation. There's no more invitation that I have for you today than to allow yourself to be ravished by Jesus. To allow yourself to be caught up and drawn into the immensity of grace and the perfect love of Jesus as he pursues you. Each week, as we do this sermon series together, each week we're going to give you what we call a radiant practice. And a radiant practice is something that we want to offer you to help you, in this case, get caught up into Jesus. It'll be different every week. These are available on our website. These are available, you can get these in your inbox. If you go to connectwithtrinity.com, you can sign up for an email list to get these sent to you every week. This week's radiant practice is solitude. Now, I know what stirs immediately when I say the word solitude. What stirs is, I don't have time for that, right? Because I've said that before. When I say that, I have to remember I watched like 3 hours of Blacklist last night, so I probably have time for that. Solitude. A couple minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. More minutes in solitude than you're doing today. How about that? More today than yesterday. Morning, lunch, evening. Solitude is about intentionally taking time to be still, to be quiet, to set your thoughts aside and to ask God to show you what's standing in the way of being ravished by Jesus. And to ask Jesus to do just that. So that's the practice. I want to invite you to that this week. Just try it. Again, more minutes tomorrow than today. There's also a prayer that's in your bulletin. If you don't have a bulletin, do one of you, can I steal yours? Because I don't have. If you don't have a bulletin, get one. There's a prayer in there. It's called the Love of Jesus. This is a Puritan prayer from a prayer book called The Valley of Vision. And I know we say Puritan, and that stirs up some things too, and it's okay. It can stir those up, but this is really beautiful. So let this be, maybe let this be your solitude time. Let this guide and direct your solitude time every day. Maybe this is it. That's okay. We're going to pray this together in just a minute. Here's the last thing I want to say. Maybe you're here today and you just deeply desire to be ravished by Jesus, and maybe you don't know what that means or how to do that or what that looks like. That's okay. This is why we're here, to help you navigate those things, to process with you, to pray for you. Or maybe you're here like me, having grown up in the church, but not maybe sure that you've ever truly experienced Jesus. That's okay too. That's okay too. So I want to offer this. Meredith and I are going to be around after the service. We'll be right here in the front row. Meredith will be over here. I'll be over here. If you want to process this with someone or have one of us pray with you, we would love to do that. There's no pressure, but the offer is there. May we be radiant together. May we have the courage to allow Jesus to ravish us and undo us. Let's pray. O Father of Jesus, help me to approach thee with deepest reverence, not with presumption, not with servile fear, but with holy boldness. Thou art beyond the grasp of my understanding, but not beyond that of my love. Thou knowest that I love thee supremely, for you are supremely adorable, good, and perfect. My heart melts at the love of Jesus, my brother, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, married to me, dead for me, risen for me. He is mine, and I am his, given to me as well as for me. I'm never so much mine as when I am his, or so lost to myself until lost in him. Then I find true personhood. But my love is frost and cold, ice and snow. Let his love warm me, lighten my burden, be my heaven. May it be more revealed to me in all its influences, that my love to him may be more fervent and glowing. Let the mighty tide of his everlasting love cover the rocks of my sin and care. Then let my spirit float above those things which had else wrecked my life. Make me fruitful by living that love, my character become more beautiful every day. If traces of Christ's love artistry be upon me, may he work on with his divine brush till the complete image be obtained, and I made a perfect copy of him, my master. O Lord Jesus, come to me. O divine Spirit, rest upon me. O Holy Father, look on me in mercy for the sake of the well-loved.